Hey all, Scott here. Oh, don't worry, this one's my primary Wii U, and these are my Wii U's in case I get lasagna on this one.
Who doesn't love having like all the consoles in the world? You can play any game you like, they all have different sized power adapters and video cables, and they're all huge and take up so much room, and what is this, an electric bill? There's a virgin tax?
Should probably unplug one of these.
I hate how video games or products were just expected to either throw away or keep everything we'd ever need to use them. Like, the only way you can play Deadman's Quest is to buy the PlayStation 3 hardware plus a PlayStation Move controller. That's f***ed up. Why can't I play these old games on the box I already have? Instead, I have to keep a GameCube on standby. But the thing is, some game consoles have us covered, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and I've seen 4 Wii U's plugged in at once. Backwards compatibility is something everybody wants, but nobody will use. Having your new game console be able to play your old collection of games is wildly convenient. I mean, that means out of the box, it has a vast library of existing titles. And not only that, but it's easier to warrant buying a new console than selling your old one. You can still play your old games, plus new ones as well. Yup, backwards compatibility sure is great, which is why God doesn't want us to have it. Backwards compatibility is something the video game industry thinks they want to do, and then they take it away and bring it back, give up, try again. It's not a standard. Some console generations have nothing but backwards compatible consoles, and then the next era comes along and they wipe our memories. Playing PlayStation 1 games on a PlayStation 4? Bullshit, that can't happen. I'm a man of science, not of God. Nobody wants to be told all these things they bought over the years are obsolete and can't be used anymore. One of the biggest movements I was a part of was when Apple changed iPhone plugs. So to get a new console where none of my old stuff works on it, that stings. I can't be alone with wanting just one box to play all games underneath my TV. I love the different consoles, the different designs, the characteristics of each device, but having all of my games playable through one HDMI cord is all I ever want. Some people might say, Scott, just buy a PC and get into PC gaming. Yeah, sure, when I learn the error of my ways. It's just so annoying that you have this one console that tries to be the all-in-one experience of bringing together the entire lineage of a company's library of games for previous consoles, to just have their next console throw it all away. In some cases, it makes total sense. The Nintendo Switch doesn't play Wii U discs. If it did, that would be horrifying. But many times, it just kind of feels like either a really stupid oversight, a lack of respect for history, or an excuse to resell old games. And the cries for backwards compatibility have been around for a while. Atari released the Atari 2600 and followed it up with the Atari 5200, an upgraded console that was bigger in every way and couldn't play your old 2600 games. Yes, buy this newer console in 1982 that has fewer games than your current one, and the games it does have are just updated versions of the games you already own. It may have better graphics, but why were you buying Atari for graphics? It was 1982, the word graphics wasn't invented yet. It was especially pathetic that Atari's new console couldn't play old Atari games when the competition was releasing adapters that allowed you to play old Atari games on their machines. Legal? Not really, but it wasn't strictly illegal.
That's a bonus.
This was the peach fuzz era of game consoles. Nobody knew where things lied legally, so the ColecoVision and Intellivision both had adapters you could buy that played most Atari 2600 games. Well, Atari couldn't just look pathetic. They were Atari! So they released their own adapter for the Atari 5200 that played Atari 2600 games, and it only worked with certain models of the 5200. Imagine if this banana was the Atari 5200. Sure, using cartridge adapters was a way to get backwards compatibility, but it's just clunky. You wish you could just plug every cartridge into the same slot. Having an adapter on standby isn't that much more convenient than just keeping the old console. Well, Atari fixed quite a bit with their next system, the Atari 7800, basically what the 5200 should have been all along. It wasn't backwards compatible with the 5200, but was backwards compatible with the 2600. So now you can play all your Atari 2600 games in 1986. God, give the 7800 credit, it was the first console with backwards compatibility built in without needing cartridge adapters, but by the time it came out, who cared? The problem with doing backwards compatibility this way meant the cartridges for your new system had to be shaped exactly like the old ones, or else you'd have to make 2 different cartridge slots. And that would just simply drive up costs, because you see, backwards compatibility may not be included with many consoles due to how much it would take to cram an old console into this new console. So that's why back in the day, many companies opted for the adapter route, like Sega. The Sega Master System happened, we just have to accept it. And when Sega started work on their next console, the Sega Genesis, did they really want to include a Master System cartridge and card slot on this new system? Like, that would be nice, but the Master System wasn't the biggest success. Hearing that the Genesis could play the existing Master System library,
I would be thrilled if I knew what that meant.
So Sega decided to release an adapter instead, the Power Base Converter. Plug this into the cartridge slot and we can actually play the majority of the Master System library on the Genesis. So what, like 4 games? Weirdly enough, the Genesis has all the hardware to play Master System games baked inside. It just doesn't have the cartridge and card slots. This only truly works with the Genesis Model 1, though with some finagling you can get it to work on the Model 2, and over in Europe a redesigned converter was released that works with this model, and then the Model 3 is only compatible with, Nothing. The Super Nintendo was supposed to have backwards compatibility with the NES in some form, whether a cartridge adapter or actually being included via the console itself, but Nintendo didn't want people to evolve that quickly. Many were a bit miffed that they couldn't play their old games on the SNES, but that didn't stop them from really digging shit. I think this was a true testament to the power of backwards compatibility. The Sega Genesis had it via an adapter, the Super Nintendo sold more. The Atari 7800 had it built in, nobody cared. It's a great feature, but it obviously doesn't affect sales all too much. Though if you really wanted to play older games through your SNES, you had options. The Super Game Boy allowed you to play Game Boy games on the system. Not sure if this really counts as backwards compatibility since the Game Boy is handheld, more so an outlet for the Super Nintendo to express itself. This is awesome. It's great to be able to play these games via a method that doesn't fucking stink. And of course, it only plays Game Boy games. What about Game Boy Color games? Well, the same year the Game Boy Color released, in Japan only, Nintendo released an updated Super Game Boy, the Super Game Boy 2. It could play Game Boy games and now had the ability to hook up a link cable to play multiplayer Game Boy games. Finally! And if you really wanted to play NES games on your SNES, there was an unlicensed adapter released, the Super 8 in 1995. Not a bad accessory considering it could play Japanese Super Famicom and Famicom games in addition to NES and SNES. Not fully ideal, I mean, it's unlicensed. The games don't run as good as they would be playing through the standard SNES slot or on a regular NES, but back in the day, this made things a bit more convenient. But this was when backwards compatibility came to a crashing halt. The mere fact game consoles moved over to CDs instead of cartridges meant there really weren't any feasible ways to incorporate support for the previous generation of consoles. Like, were you really going to include a cartridge slot on your fancy CD machine? Sega, you son of a bitch. Well, on the Sega Saturn, this is really only for stuff like memory cards, but it looks nearly the right size for something like a Sega Genesis cartridge. At least Nintendo stuck with cartridges, which meant they could totally make the Nintendo 64 compatible with the SNES. Totally. But with handhelds, man, these things were backwards compatible all the time. You couldn't stop these things from being backwards compatible. They were backwards compatible for breakfast. The Game Boy Color could play Game Boy games, the Neo Geo Pocket Color could play Neo Geo Pocket games, all Wonder Swans played Wonder Swan games, and hey, at least with the Nintendo 64, if you plug in the transfer pack, you can play Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow through Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo 64 and nothing else, because just keep your old Super Nintendo to play the rest of your Game Boy games on the TV. This is the mentality that I hate. Like, is there any reason why I shouldn't be able to play Game Boy games on the Nintendo 64? I have to keep my Super Nintendo if I want to play it on the TV? Well, there was an adapter to play Game Boy Advance, Color, and Game Boy games, never made publicly available, called the Wide Boy 64, developed by Intelligent Systems for the Nintendo 64. This was pretty much used to test Game Boy games, play on a TV in competitions and in demo stations. It's crazy this was never turned into a retail product, but just keep your Super Nintendo, you dumb bitch. Backwards compatibility was almost always a conversation point with consoles that never ended up even going that route. I believe Sega considered giving the Dreamcast the ability to play Sega Saturn games. Why wouldn't they do that? Well, why would you say your console can play a Ghost? But with the Saturn only truly being very popular in Japan, they might have played around with the idea of the Japanese Dreamcast being the only model compatible with Saturn games. Nothing about that sounds even close to a good idea, which means it must have been a Sega idea. And then when the Dreamcast was about to fucking explode, Sega tried to get Microsoft to include Dreamcast compatibility on the Xbox. See, that would have been cool, but it's just sort of weird. Like, oh, the Xbox is compatible with this entirely separate game company's games from a completely different game console. It's just natural. What do you mean the Wii won't play Betamax? The Game Boy Advance, of course, could play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on it, now with black borders free of charge. You can even change the aspect ratio if you're a fucking creep. Of course, the old cartridges really like to make sure you know you're playing them. These things stick out so hard, everybody on the bus will know what you're doing. Thankfully, the GameCube brought back full-blown Game Boy support with the Game Boy Player. You may not have been able to play Nintendo 64 cartridges on this thing, but you could play nearly all Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. Except the Game Boy Advance video cartridges. We were so close to a new tomorrow. They just wouldn't work. Of course, this was to stop you from recording these videos onto a VHS tape and distributing them. The market for VHSs have all grown up. Volume 1, huge. Now with the PlayStation consoles, these were notoriously backwards compatible. The PlayStation 2 could play nearly all PlayStation 1 games. You could even use the same controllers and memory cards. And with the PlayStation 3, that was designed to be the ultimate thing. PS1 and PS2 games were set to be playable on specific models. All PS3s could play PS1 games, not all PS3s could play PS2. And then they stopped producing PS2 compatible PS3 systems entirely. At least PS1 was supported all the way through, but God, what a mess. The Nintendo DS could play Game Boy Advance games, only Game Boy Advance games. You know, to think of it, the Game Boy Micro had that limitation as well. No Game Boy or Game Boy Color support. And then to be fair, those cartridges were like, what, like 5 times the size of that thing, so made sense. The DS had 2 cartridge slots, one for DS games and one for GBA games. The inclusion of a GBA slot felt more like an escape plan though. Like, hey, if the DS doesn't do well, we can still sell it as a Game Boy Advance. When they revised the DS with the Nintendo DS Lite, the GBA slot remained, but now the games stuck out like how games stick out on a DS Lite. It was pretty bad. And then with the Nintendo DSi going forward, they removed the GBA slot. Why? Because they ran out of holes to put here. The Xbox 360 was set to be as backwards compatible with the original Xbox as possible. How did they do? 461 out of 1001 ain't bad. So what's the deal with this? Well, the Xbox 360 doesn't have that original Xbox spunk baked into it. Instead, Microsoft decided to update the 360 gradually throughout its life to enable support for specific older titles to run via emulation. At the end of the day, roughly half the library is supported. Not terrible, not amazing, definitely Microsoft. Playing these games on 360 works, and many of them look much better being played here, though there are various technical problems with quite a handful of them. I've never come across anything unplayable. The game supported work well enough, but Microsoft ended adding original Xbox games to the 360 about halfway through the system's life. That's something you notice with the backwards compatibility. The companies just give up. The Wii, GameCube support, the whole 9 yards, 4 controller ports and 2 memory card slots. To the 80-year-olds who bought a Wii for Wii Sports, I'm sure these ports horrified them. Of course, it doesn't work with the Game Boy Player. As a kid, I was adamant these two could connect in some way, and because of that, my picture's still up at Nintendo customer support. But then with future revisions of the Wii, they stripped them of all things GameCube. Obviously to cut costs, but everybody freaked out when they did this. Even though the people freaking out already owned a Wii with GameCube support at this point. At least the Wii U always had support for Wii games, though its method of doing so was pretty clunky. You'd have to enter Wii mode to play Wii games. The system basically turned off and back on again, and bam, it's a Wii now. I mean, it works, and Wii games look really good running on a Wii U. But it is just unbelievably clunky to have to go into a completely separate mode of the system to play Wii games. Like, sure, that means most games will have full compatibility if you have the whole Wii menu set up and whatnot, but it's just weird. Like, oh man, can I access the Wii U system settings through here? No, you're in Wii mode now, fucker. The Nintendo 3DS always had support for DS games, which is a godsend. They look kinda foggy on the original model, but look pretty slick on later ones. I was surprised they didn't pull a GBA on the Nintendo DSi and remove compatibility for the DS later on. Like, why? The DS cards fit in the 3DS card slot. They would have had no reason to do it, but that's the Nintendo way. But see, with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, backwards compatibility was no more. It was announced pretty early on they wanted to shift over to a completely new architecture, and thus it would be incredibly costly to build in compatibility like that into these consoles. So like, I get it. It takes a lot of research and development to ensure all these old games work perfectly on the new system. Plus with the PS3, that was Funk City. It's incredibly hard to play PS3 games on anything but a PS3. So it made sense Sony didn't make that a priority. Because when backwards compatibility is offered, barely anybody takes advantage of it. People go, sweet, and then proceed to just play new games from there on out. It's a great selling point on the back of the box. Like I said, it's nice knowing all your old shit works on all your new shit, but it doesn't mean that much more than that to most people. But since the PS4 couldn't play any older games, the lack of backwards compatibility meant re-releases. They could repackage PS3 games on PS4 and make so much more money. I don't think that was the core reason why they didn't try to do backwards compatibility, but it probably persuaded them to not do it that much more. Oh, the PS4 can't play PS3 games? Oops. I like re-releases because they give companies an excuse to put together the definitive release of a title with all the DLC and the best graphics and the stupidest box art. It was just funny to me how some of these were called remastered editions when the original release came out, like, yesterday. The Last of Us Remastered. Remastered a year after it came out, but somehow the Xbox actually did something right. In 2015, it was announced the Xbox One was actually becoming backwards compatible with Xbox 360 after all, and in 2017, the original Xbox was added to the fray. The way they did it was somewhat similar to the Xbox 360's backwards compatibility. Over time, certain older games were added to the support list, but this time, they were ensuring each and every one was as optimized for the Xbox One as possible. Many backwards compatible games look and run so much better on Xbox One than they ever did on 360 or the original Xbox. The main issue here is, again, not all titles are supported, especially with the original Xbox. You can use the original discs, but that just unlocks a downloadable version of the game. Nothing's playing off the disc here. So that means you have to download this game to your hard drive. More space is being used up on your console. However, it's great to have backwards compatibility at all, even if it's just a bit limited. Over on the PlayStation 4, you can stream PlayStation 3 games through PlayStation Now. but nobody gives a shit. And at least with the PlayStation 5 and 4th generation of Xbox, they are nearly fully backwards compatible with PS4 and Xbox One, which is exactly what I like to see. But going over the history of this stuff really hits home how much most companies and customers for that matter just don't care. It's really unfortunate, but the PS4 didn't have backwards compatibility, and it made the Xbox One say uncle. The Wii U had backwards compatibility, the Nintendo Switch didn't. What happened? The world's worst riddle. But hey, there is a little thing called forwards backwards compatibility. I have this adapter to play Game Boy Advance on the Super Nintendo. This is amazing and stupid. And hey, a Genesis adapter for the Super Nintendo. Crossbreeding is finally in! Backwards compatibility is something that just doesn't get enough attention in the gaming industry. Most people don't care about it, it's obvious. Most of the best-selling consoles each generation don't include backwards compatibility. It's not a selling point to most people, and thus, most companies decide against including it. It's always appreciated, seldom utilized, and I think I just have to accept the fact that I'm never gonna get that all-in-one box I always wanted. There's always gonna be something holding backwards compatibility backwards. And you know what? I've moved on. I don't need that box, and I've also let go of the past. I sold 3 of my Wii U's. If only something was backwards compatible with it.